I remember the heat wave from last month. The air was thick, and my car was so hot I could not touch the steering wheel. Everyone was talking about it and posting pictures of the temperature. But now, just a few weeks later, I am noticing something strange. The headlines are gone, and the panic has disappeared. It already feels like this is just how summer is now. I used to think we forgot because we were careless or distracted, but I was wrong about why this happens. It is tempting for me to say that I forget because I am careless, or maybe just too distracted by the next big story in the news. We often think that if an event is extreme enough, the experience should permanently change how we think about the world. If I lived through a week of brutal heat that made the air feel like an oven, surely my brain should remember that danger and respond more strongly next time. But that is the part I got wrong. My brain is not being lazy. It is doing something much more efficient and much more dangerous. It is constantly recalibrating itself to the world it has recently survived. Think about it this way. Imagine I am standing in a room with a thermostat on the wall. Normally, I would expect a thermostat to have a fixed idea of what comfortable is. Let us say 72 degrees. If the room gets to 85 degrees, the alarm goes off and the air conditioning kicks in, because the machine remembers what normal is supposed to be. But now, imagine this thermostat has a specific kind of flaw. Every few days, it looks at the current temperature and says, okay, this is the new normal. If the room slowly gets hotter, degree by degree, the thermostat keeps resetting itself to that higher number. The room is becoming dangerously hot, but the alarm never sounds because the normal point keeps moving up. I am sitting there, sweating, but my machine is telling me everything is fine. That is the part that gets me. The danger is rising, but the sense of emergency is disappearing because the reference point will not stay still. That is the heart of what scientists call shifting baseline syndrome. The heat waves I am living through today do not stop being extreme in a historical sense. If I were to look at the climate data from 50 years ago, the temperatures would look like a massive violation of the rules. But my brain does not naturally compare today to the 1970s. I compare it against the last few years I have survived. Because this intense heat keeps repeating, I stop treating it as a shock to the system. The alarm in my head weakens, because the line I call normal has quietly moved upward to match the world right in front of me. I have not lost my memory. I have just updated my expectations. And that is why the disaster starts to look like just another Tuesday. So how does my brain construct this sense of normal? You see, my mind needs a baseline to judge everything. Without a reference point, a sensation like heat is just a physical signal without any real meaning. I need to be able to ask, is this hot compared to yesterday? Or, is this dangerous compared to what I expect? Without that comparison, I cannot decide if I should be worried or if I should just keep walking. The problem is that this reference point is not a fixed, permanent record. It is more like a piece of driftwood floating in the water. It moves based on my most recent experiences, and it moves much faster than I realize. My brain is constantly taking the average of what I have seen lately and deciding that is the new starting point for everything else. There was a massive study that really put a number on how fast this mental drift happens. Researchers analyzed over 2 billion social media posts to see how people talk about the weather in real time. They wanted to know a simple thing: how far back my memory goes when I am deciding what normal weather looks like. The answer they found is both fascinating and a little bit terrifying. It turns out that my sense of a normal temperature is shaped almost entirely by the weather I have experienced in just the last few years, often only between 2 and 8 years. Think about that. My mind is not automatically carrying around a century-long record of what the climate should be. Instead, I have this very short, moving window. If I live through a string of historically extreme summers, my internal clock resets itself to that new level of heat. What used to be a once-in-a-generation emergency starts to feel like a standard July afternoon because it has happened enough times to become familiar. This is the part that gets me. The study showed that the more often I am exposed to these extreme conditions, the less I talk about them or treat them as a violation of the rules. My psychological baseline is rewriting itself in real time. effectively erasing the sense of shock, even while the physical danger to my body stays the same. This explains why even the most dangerous weather can start to feel like background noise. When the same abnormal heat appears summer after summer, my brain stops treating it as a violation of the rules. It is important to realize that I might still feel terrible. My body is still sweating, my heart is working harder, and I am physically uncomfortable. But here's the thing. The heat is no longer remarkable. Our attention is like a spotlight that only shines on things that surprise us. Once the surprise of the heat disappears into that 2 to 8 year window, the spotlight moves on. I am still living in a crisis, but because the contrast is gone, my mind stops treating it like one. Psychology has a specific name for this: adaptation-level theory. It basically says that my perception of any stimulus depends on a reference point that updates with my experience. Think about it this way. If I walk into a 75-degree room after standing in the freezing snow, it feels like a sauna. But if I walk into that same room after being in an even hotter attic, it feels like a cool relief. The room temperature did not change, but my experience of it did, because my baseline around it shifted. This is why the same heat can feel shocking once, and then feel like a standard afternoon later. I am simply comparing today to a new, higher starting point. This is a very efficient way for my brain to work. You see, paying attention is expensive. It takes a lot of energy for my nervous system to stay on high alert. So my brain is built to save that power by ignoring things that stay the same. This is called neural habituation. If a sound or a temperature repeats without an immediate catastrophe every single second, my brain basically turns down the volume on that signal. It is like when I first walk into a room with a loud ticking clock. I hear it clearly at first, but after 10 minutes the sound just vanishes. My brain has not stopped working, it has just decided that the clock is not a threat. So it filters the sound into the background. That is exactly what happens with repeated heat. Because the heat does not kill me in the first 5 minutes, my mind classifies it as environment rather than emergency. It turns the alarm into background noise, so I can focus on new, sudden changes. It is a brilliant tool for living in a noisy world. But it is a dangerous trap when the signal I am ignoring is a slow-motion disaster, like a warming climate. My biology is literally designed to let me sleep through the sirens if they stay at a constant volume. And the problem gets even deeper when I look at the gap between generations. This same drift does not just happen inside my own head over a few years. It happens across decades. I want you to imagine a child born today. While I might remember winters, when the local lake froze every single year, that child is born into a world where that lake never freezes, and the summers are always sweltering. Because that child never lived inside my older, cooler baseline, they do not experience the current heat as a shocking decline. To them, a summer that I find terrifying is just the starting point. They treat the degraded environment they grew up in as perfectly normal. This is the part that gets me. Society's memory is constantly being overwritten because each new generation inherits a changed world and calls it the default. There is a researcher named Daniel Gilbert who has spent a lot of time thinking about why we react this way. He argues that our brains are basically ancient alarm systems that were built to solve a very specific kind of problem. I want you to imagine a baseball flying directly at your face. In that moment, you do not need a spreadsheet or a historical record to tell you to duck. Your brain screams emergency and moves your body instantly. This is because the threat is sudden, it is personal, and it is happening right now. But Gilbert's point is that climate change and the shifting heat waves that come with it is almost the exact opposite of that baseball. It is gradual, it is abstract, and it is spread across decades. To our prehistoric brains, a slow rise in the background temperature does not look like an enemy. It just looks like the world is changing color. We perfectly evolved to notice a single stone thrown at us, but we are psychologically blind to the slow motion rising of the tide. This is the part that gets me. Our biology is tuned for a world of fast predators, not a world of shifting baselines. This is exactly why a heat wave can fail to create any kind of lasting alarm. Even though the actual week of heat feels acute and painful, while it is happening, the larger pattern behind it is almost invisible to my senses. Once the temperature drops even a few degrees, my brain treats the emergency as over. I remember that I had an unpleasant day, but I lose the thread that connects that single day to the shifting baseline happening in the background. Think about that. My mind is effectively separating the individual events from the trend, allowing the shock to evaporate the moment the weather turns. It is like noticing a single hot spark, but failing to realize the entire house is slowly being heated from the foundation up. Because the event has a clear end date, but the problem does not, my psychological alarm system resets, while the physical danger continues to climb. You would think that living through a disaster like that would be enough to permanently change someone's mind. There is this common hope that if a heat wave or a flood is bad enough, it will wake people up and create a lasting shift in how we see the world. But when researchers look at large groups of people who have survived these events, they find something that feels almost impossible. Direct experience often produces surprisingly small changes in what people believe or which policies they support. The shock is intense while the sun is beating down, but because my brain is so efficient at resetting its baseline, the experience does not always leave a permanent mark on my long-term worldview. I can suffer through the heat, survive it, and then go right back to seeing the world exactly as I did before the mercury rose. It is a sobering realization. Personal pain does not automatically lead to a stable, new level of concern if my psychological alarm system has already moved on to the next normal. My social world only makes this mental habit stronger. I have noticed that attention has its own kind of social clock that moves much faster than the actual climate. When the heat is at its worst, it is the only thing on my feed. It is a headline, then a conversation with neighbors, and then, almost overnight, it just becomes a memory. I am constantly influenced by the availability heuristic, which is a mental shortcut where I judge how important a danger is based on how easily I can remember a recent example of it. When the news cycle is screaming about a heat wave, the threat feels massive. But the media cycle moves at a breakneck pace, and as soon as a news story takes over, the heat wave is pushed out of that available slot in my mind. Think about that. The headlines disappear much faster than the actual risk to my health. My brain sees the empty front page and decides the danger must be gone, even if the baseline has permanently shifted. It is a feedback loop where my internal habituation and the external news cycle work together to bury the disaster. So if my brain is naturally designed to let this gradual change disappear into the background, how do I fix it? I have realized that I must find a way to restore the contrast that my mind has lost. Smooth upward-sloping graphs might be accurate, but they are psychologically invisible to me. My mind sees that slow slope and treats it like a drift it can ignore. To wake myself up, I need abrupt change visualizations. I need to see the before and the after, side by side, in a way that feels like a sudden jump. Think about seeing a photo of a lake I loved as a kid, completely frozen, placed right next to a photo of that same lake today as open water in midwinter. That is not a trend, it is a change of state. By showing only the high contrast endpoints, I can bypass my habit of updating my baseline and finally see the scale of what is shifted. These kinds of binary visuals work because they take that slow, confusing drift and turn it into a visible switch. When I look at a standard climate chart, I am asking my brain to feel the weight of a tiny decimal point change on a line. But my brain is not built to feel a 0.2 degree shift. It is built to notice when a rule is broken. So instead of a graph, I need to see a world that has changed its state. I want to see a yes or no situation. Think about the difference between a school being open and a school being closed because the building cannot handle the heat, Or a day where the air is safe to breathe versus a day where the smoke is so thick that I must stay inside. When I see that contrast, that on-off switch, it forces my mind to stop updating its baseline. It stops the drift. It takes the new normal and measures it against a hard, physical wall. This is the only way I can really feel the difference between a hot summer and a broken climate. It is about taking that invisible, gradual slide and turning it back into a sudden, shocking event that my alarm system can recognize and respond to. I am no longer looking at a slope. I am looking at a threshold that we have already crossed. Which brings me back to that thermostat on the wall. I have realized that the true danger was never just the heat itself. The danger is that the machine kept resetting every time I managed to survive another day. I can forget a heat wave within a few weeks, not because it was harmless, but because my mind has quietly moved the goalposts of what it means to be safe. I am sitting in a room that is fundamentally breaking, but I have learned to call the smoke atmosphere and the flames summer. I must remember that just because my brain has stopped screaming does not mean the fire has gone out.